Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you here, and it's great to be here together. I'm Steve Farber. I'm the Director of Mobilizing Justice here at the University of Toronto, and welcome to our fourth annual symposium, all about the Mobilizing Justice National Survey on Transport Poverty. Uh, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which I'm joining you from today. I'm speaking from Toronto, which is situated on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. I also want to recognize that participants are joining us from communities across the country, each with their own histories, relationships, and responsibilities to the Indigenous peoples whose lands they are on today. As we gather to discuss transportation and accessibility and equity and inclusion, it's important to remember that mobility, land, infrastructure have all long been shaped by histories of displacement and exclusion, sometimes violence, and that efforts to build more equitable transportation systems must also include reflection on those broader histories and our ongoing responsibilities. Uh, a little bit of uh, uh, business items to begin. Please be respectful and courteous to everyone in the meeting today. And I want to invite you to rename yourself. And after a comma, please mention your workplace, or if you are coming from a workplace today, or if you're a student somewhere, or a representative of a community, please just drop that into your name so that we have a better idea about who's here. And also for folks to be part of the conversation, can know a bit more about you. Um, we're going to ask that visitors today stay on mute, and please raise your virtual hand using the Zoom function in order to ask to unmute yourself and ask a question or leave a comment. But please wait until you're acknowledged by the moderator or the speaker before jumping in. And otherwise, please stay on mute. The chat is open. You can use the chat as much as you like. You can ask questions, you can leave comments. Folks can try to answer your questions along the way. And it's a long day. You can feel free to leave your camera on or off as much as you wish. And please take note that we're recording the presentations today in order to post clips on our social media, on YouTube in particular. All right, so let's begin. Every year we have these symposiums, and we're always delightfully surprised by how many first timers we have year after year coming to our MJ Symposium. So I need to do a little bit of an introduction to Mobilizing Justice. So we are a 5-year partnership primarily funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And Mobilizing Justice coordinates and focuses Canada's transportation research and practitioner communities on the accessibility, participation challenges, and lived experiences of marginalized populations within the Canadian context. And these could be populations who are kind of structurally marginalized, historically marginalized, socioeconomically marginalized, or somehow left behind and marginalized inside the transportation system in particular. And MJ is co-developed with a multi-sectoral perspective that spans academia, federal and provincial government agencies, municipalities, transit authorities, private sector firms, and non-for-profit organizations. And we leverage our intersectoral partnership structure to help ensure that the research that we conduct and design reflects the challenges and goals of our partners and communities, that outcomes remain relevant to our partners and can be put into practice by our partners, and that academic research is integrated and becomes more integrated into transportation evaluations and planning practices, and help ensure that we get better outcomes for those priority populations, those marginalized groups that we focus on in our project. We have three main research objectives. The first is to document, describe, and assess the causes, the scale, the effects of, and responses to transport poverty in Canada. We have an objective to develop validated transportation equity standards and equitable planning processes to be used by transport planners, decision makers, and community advocates. And then we also have an objective to evaluate solutions that address transport poverty through the conducting of field experiments and pilots of smart mobility and transportation policy initiatives across the country. Now, for those of you who have been around for a while, you will know that Mobilizing Justice as an overall initiative is divided up into 6 different working groups. 3 of those working groups we call our activity working groups, and 3 of them are cross-cutting themes, our thematic working groups. And really, what I want to do very quickly is give you a brief overview of the accomplishments of our working groups over the past year, and then turn to an introduction of the national survey. But to get us started, I'll just say that the first activity group is really our national survey working group, and that's the topic of the entire symposium. So my summary today is going to start with activity group 2, which is our data-driven equity standards group. And this is led by Antonio Paez and Michael at McMaster and Michael Hain at the City of Toronto. And in the past year, we have seen the launch of new research projects, especially using our new national survey to examine the relationship between accessibility and important outcomes in society, like employment and educational attainment. And these new research projects will be used to help us recommend adequate levels of accessibility to the public in order to kind of create an equal playing field, equal opportunity for marginalized groups in the transportation system. We've also been very busy working on a practitioner guidebook for equitable transportation planning. This is an initiative that's been led by kind of the central team here at Mobilizing Justice, with a big shout out to Ignacio Tiznado Aiken, Jamie Fisher, Matan Singer, and also our external partners at Urban Strategies and HDR, who have been contributing immensely to this initiative. And thank you also to people across the partnership for giving feedback on earlier drafts and being part of the interview process in order to design and deliver on this guidebook that we hope will be useful. And the good news is this is almost ready to launch. We're in the final review of the last round of feedback from the partnership, and we should be launching and releasing the guidebook in June, so next month. The other thing that I can announce is that we've just entered into a new contract with Willem Klumpenhauer, Klumpentown Consulting, if you know him, to develop a new tool for transit sketch planning and accessibility calculation. So this is going to be a tool developed by MJ for our community that will allow practitioners and advocates and academics to do a graphically, like through a graphical user interface, sketch out a transit network redesign scenario, automatically compute accessibility scores, and also deliver on kind of the estimation of equity metrics based on these different sketch planning scenarios. So this isn't to replace travel demand models that go into the long-range transportation planning process or business case analysis, but it's really about idea generation and democratizing that whole process and putting this capability to compute access scores and look at the equity impacts of different transit projects, put that power into the hands of more people, either across our practitioner communities or across the advocacy and community groups across the country in order to get more and better ideas into the transportation planning ecosystem. So this is going to take a year to complete, but that's what we've just started in this working group as well. Okay, activity 3 working group is all about the pilots. This is a working group that's led by Professor Matt Palm, who is our previous, 3 research coordinators ago, started the project with us here at the University of Toronto, has since moved on to the University of North Carolina. And but he's maintained a leadership role in this pilots program. And just we've presented lots of these pilots already in symposia and across different fora. But as a recap, we have curated 8 pilot evaluations. These are all pre-post studies looking at new LRT construction, new transit fare subsidies, micro-mobility access programs, the BC e-bike purchase incentive program, and also an active school travel program about to launch in Halifax. And so over the next year, we will be continuing to complete these pilots and then also do our synthesis work to get the results online and into more accessible formats for the general public. All right, on to our cross-cutting themes. We've got our prioritizing populations group. This is now being led by Leah Ravensberger at McMaster University, co-led by Jeremy Gelb at ARTM. And really, over the past year, they have been seeing out the completion of 7 case studies that the MJ community responded to in an open call, aiming to reach harder to access populations with specialized needs and barriers in the transportation system. And the idea here is knowing that some of our major data collection efforts, like the national survey that we're going to talk about today, really aren't going to capture the needs and experiences of every population group in Canada, especially hard to reach groups. And so this was an effort for us to really tell the story of folks who weren't going to be part of our national survey, most likely, either because of a disability barrier, because they're part of an Indigenous community, because they live in the far north, because they are youth or elderly, technology challenged in some way. And so this was a way for us to help tell those stories and integrate that learning into our recommendations and research corpus. And out of that, we've got 2 synthesis products. One, which is wrapped up now, is kind of a based on the community of practice that developed around the qualitative research that was undertaken in this working group. We now have a new report on the challenges and importance of qualitative research within the transportation space in Canada. And then also we'll be conducting a more traditional synthesis looking at lessons learned across the substantive lessons learned about the experiences of these different groups across Canada. Okay, and last but not least, our Theme 2 working group on transportation modes. I'll say that most of the quote unquote research involvement of this group has come to an end. We are in the 6th year of our 5-year partnership now. So as expected, their main work has been completed, but they've actually maintained a very active role, especially in knowledge mobilization. And so I'd like to highlight a new resource that we have available online called the Fast Facts on Active Transportation website in Canada. And it's a tool that will bring to the fingertips of advocates research results on active transportation, all with a Canadian focus or Canadian study area. So facts and research snippets from Canadian articles on active transportation, and it's all thematically organized and geographically organized for folks to find key statistics and quotes and things to bring out of these research studies and put into your advocacy and planning work. They've also continuously been working on updates of the catalog of community initiatives, which is our attempt to document all of the community-led activities that are trying to address transportation gaps in the Canadian transportation system. And both of those resources are available on our hub our hub website with the URL shared here. And just while we're on active transportation, our friends at Velo Canada Bikes asked for a quick shout out because next week they are launching the 2026 Pedal Poll, which is a volunteer led community science project to collect active transportation data across the country. And they've done a massive amount of work this year to create a new app that will help with their data collection and also incorporating all of the new and emerging active transportation modes that we're seeing on our streets today. And so this is a shout out for volunteers and for those who are interested in learning more or becoming part of this amazing initiative. You can follow the link velocanadabikes.org/pedalpoll or get the QR code on the screen right now. So we invite you to be a part of that important exercise. Okay, so that is the summary of the state of play for the Mobilizing Justice Partnership over the last year, and a little bit of an indication of some of the work that we're ramping up and getting ready to do this year. But for the rest of my presentation now, I just want to give a brief introduction to the national survey. I think an introduction is needed because we're going to have all of our presentations today about the survey, and this will allow each of them to focus more on the results rather than on the kind of the background about what the survey is and what it's all about. So first of all, why did we see the need for this survey? Because I would say Canada is an extremely data-rich country when it comes to transportation. We have amazing travel surveys, some of the best and biggest household travel surveys in the world, collecting great data on people's trips, their modes, their times, and all of the observed travel behavior. We also have an incredible census in this country that does give us some basic information on commuting flows and detailed information on occupations and demographics of the population. We have really wonderful infrastructure data on the supply side. We know where our roads are. We know where our transit networks are. And more, we have better repositories and standardized ways to keep track of where our bike lanes and active transportation infrastructure are as well. And I would even go so far to say that we've got some of the best derived products from these types of data sets out there as well. So over the last few years, Infrastructure Canada, or HICC, and Statistics Canada have partnered to produce our spatial access measures, our proximity measures, and land use data sets that can be used in all sorts of transportation planning assessments. So I'd say we're extremely fortunate. We're very good at counting trips. We're very good at knowing where things are. But actually, we're quite bad at understanding people's hardships. We don't really know who's being left behind in the transportation system. We don't know who can't afford trips, who has trouble reaching jobs, schools, healthcare, building social capital. We don't have a good understanding on who's being forced to travel longer distances or undesirable trips that take far too long. And we don't really have a good measure of exposure to externalities of the transportation system, like air pollution or accidents and safety externalities, or even, urban externalities that you experience while traveling, like crime or harassment, or unsafe environments. Now, this isn't to say that we don't have some data on these topics. I would say that our regional household travel surveys and those organizing them are getting better and better at incorporating new types of questions into their surveys. But these are patchy, right? And one region at a time, lacking consistency across the country. We also have lots of data coming out of academia, specialized surveys looking at these types of transport poverty issues. These are really small sample, geared for academic inquiry, no ability to really take these and help inform practice in a substantial way with these academic studies and small sample data sets. And so I'd also just say that our existing data when it comes to kind of equity and transportation equity is often mode specific. So we have a survey on transit users and a survey on bikers and a survey on ride hailing, but nothing that's comprehensive across modes. We also have lots of specialized surveys on the elderly and on youth and on people with disabilities, nothing that cuts across all of these different dimensions of identity and marginalization. And of course, a lot of geographic specificity in the country as well. So nothing that covers everywhere all at once. And, you know, I think with better data on these issues, we're going to be able to design better policies. And I see some major risks if we don't do better on this front. I think the first is recognizing that we are spending a lot of money on infrastructure right now, but we risk kind of being very inefficient with our infrastructure planning and our investments without a proper understanding on who is going to benefit from these investments, what those benefits are going to be. Is it going to be travel time savings, or is it going to be unlocking suppressed demand and participation in employment, in healthcare, and education that are going to have major long range economic effects that we're going to miss without having proper data on that. I would also say that our governments are getting very good at incorporating equity mandates into our transportation planning processes, but without the data, we can't deliver on those mandates. And so, if we're going to have requirements to talk about the equity impacts, then we need data to study and to forecast and to understand what the equity implications will be. And then finally, on the research side, I just think there's a huge gap in this country of really understanding the extent and the impacts of the types of problems that people are facing in the transportation system and how different solutions are going to help solve those problems. And so we need data on problems, not just data on observed travel behavior, but really understanding um, the barriers, constraints, and the impacts that those barriers and constraints are having on people's lives. And so, out of that kind of context, we went into the design and implementation of our national survey. And this started really at the beginning of MJ. One of the first workshops we held at the very beginning was a workshop on bringing the entire partnership together, get a better understanding of the types of themes and areas that we wanted better data on. And so we had lots of input from the partnership and from impacted communities. We worked closely also with our community equity advisory table to help us with framing, with language, making sure that the questions and the way that we ask the questions were going to be received positively in a helpful way by impacted communities rather than being kind of subjects of investigation or being prodded, right? As folks who have experience of marginalization often feel negatively impacted by study and inquiry, whether from academia or government. And so, how do we reshape the narrative and help design the survey so that communities see that what we're trying to do is actually empower them to tell their stories so that we can advocate on their behalf and for better policy, right? And improve our understanding of the situations they find themselves in. Of course, this couldn't have been done without the MJ leadership table, and a big shout out to Catherine Morency and Hawaida Hassan for their many years of dedicated effort in designing the survey and operationalizing it. And then extensive pilot testing went into the survey as well, testing for clarity, structure, duration, respondent burden, and all of this led to a final design of a survey that's extremely comprehensive and innovative, really a first of its kind anywhere in the world, but certainly a first of its kind in Canada. And this survey is very comprehensive. It has modules on the barriers and constraints people face in their day-to-day travel behavior and needs, an assessment of their well-being and the impacts of their transportation conditions on their well-being, um, large collection of data on satisfaction levels and perceptions of their transportation situation, in-depth questioning on suppressed travel or forced mobility, a module on people's aspirations. What would they prefer? What would be ideal for them if they had these barriers or constraints or affordability issues solved? right? And then along those kind of new and innovative modules, we have very in-depth socioeconomic modules to really do a deep dive into different population groups, be that racial, immigration, disability, gender, lots and lots of detail that we seldom see on traditional transportation surveys when it comes to identity. And then we have questions on housing, affordability, neighborhood choice, and then, of course, an assessment of people's transportation resources at home, what kind of trips they make, what resources they have, cars, bikes, transit passes, what modes they use for different trip purposes, the frequency of use of different modes. So if you're interested in really understanding multimodality and how people put together their resources across, variety of modes for different types of purposes at different times of day or periods in their life, we have a nice body of data that allows us to assess this now. So with that huge survey in mind, we went out into the field in July to November of 2024, with a big helping hand from Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, who gave a big injection of funding to make sure that we can really cover the entire country with this important survey. So we now have responses from more than 27,000 people living in Canada. We cover every single census metropolitan area and every non-urban area in every province of the country. And we did a special collection focusing on low income Canadians. And here, we were quite constrained by our ability to collect data and target our recruitment, but we focused on making sure that we at least had a large number of responses from households who are earning below the median income, are earning below 60,000 Canadian dollars of household income per year. But we have nearly, I think, 10 or 20% of our sample are actually living beneath the poverty line as well. So lots of ability to look at low income groups in across the country. And then Catherine's group at Polytechnique also generated survey weights. So based on the survey, which is already a very large sample, we have a robust way to make estimates about the Canadian population at large or the population within each of our geographic strata. So really robust, about as good as it gets in terms of robust ability to tell stories about um, subgroups of the population across the country. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have with the survey actually is um, it's just so huge and it covers so much. And it's quite hard to focus in and try to understand where to start with our analysis. But just to give you an idea of the type of things that you can do with the surveys, we can now do a disparities analysis on really interesting questions about the impacts of people's transportation situation on their lives. So comparing, just an example, people living beneath the poverty line to those in higher income households, we can see that carlessness is very prevalent in low income communities across the country. 41% of low income households don't own a car, but only 3% of high income households don't own a car. So we do talk a lot and we like to talk about choice carless households and so on. But by and large, if we look at who the carless households are, these are not people just trying to make, a pro sustainability move. We really see that carlessness is a condition primarily experienced by low income households. And we also talk about the post COVID world and people no longer commuting 5 days a week and people not using transit as much. And while I think those things are true, if we look at the low income workers in our country, we see that 16% of low income workers are still taking transit to work 5 times a week. So every single day. So we can't forget about the essentiality of transit in allowing people to get to work across this country, especially those without better options or other options. If we look at the impact of people's transportation situation on their life, we see that low income people are twice as likely to say that they've had to decline an employment opportunity because of their transportation situation. And they're also twice as likely as wealthier households to say that they've missed appointments, to agree that they miss appointments because of their transportation situation. And finally, they're um, 4 times as likely to say that they just simply can't afford to use the modes of transportation that they'd wish they were using, right? Their preferred mode of transportation. So you can see that these disparities are extremely stark when you look at by income. And based on our preliminary analyses, we really see that these disparities exist across all of our marginalized population groups, whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, um, immigration status is a big one. So lots and lots of interesting stories. All of these could be their own research papers, their own articles by themselves. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what we can do with the survey now that we have it. Um, Moving forward, MJ, as a central kind of authority and custodian of the data, we're involved in 3 main types of dissemination and management of the survey. The first is we have co-developed an online tool, a new dashboard to make the data publicly accessible in a really beautiful and user-friendly way. You're going to hear from Kevin Manna, McGill University, and CurbCut in the next session on this. We also have um, curated a large number of papers, research articles that you're going to hear about later today. We'll continue to help ensure that new research and studies come out about the survey and get disseminated. And we're also busy writing for the general public. So we're telling data stories, we're putting briefs together, we're making a website that's going to tell the high level findings, what we call our headliners from the survey, and put those out on an accessible online format for folks to read or copy and paste facts and figures and put into your stories, your planning, your advocacy work. And of course, we maintain robust documentation and technical documents about the survey to answer your questions about what it's all about, how it's collected, how you can use it, and so on. So that's what kind of we're up to over the next year to help continue the curate the use and getting this out into practice. Now, for today, next up, we are going to hear from Kevin Manaw. Following that, Hawaida Hassan from the city of Edmonton is going to host a conversation amongst practitioners to talk about how we can bring findings and data from the survey into policy and practice. We'll then take a lunch break with no activity, and then we're going to go into back-to-back research sessions, hearing from PhD students, postdocs, professors, who are presenting their findings of their in-depth studies of the data in the survey. That's going to be back to back. So no scheduled breaks, but we do welcome you to just keep your headphones in. If you need to take a break for coffee, bathroom, snacks, that's on your own time. But if you keep your headphones in, you won't miss too much as you do that. So again, a big thank you to the MJ team. A big thank you to Jasmine Moazab and Amir Baruchar and MJ Central and Ignacio Tiznado Aiken as our associate director. A big thank you to the partners and the partnership. A big thank you also to our funders and sponsors, especially to Shirk, for making all of this a reality. And so with no further ado, I will turn the mic over to Professor Manoff at McGill University and the founder, one of the co-founders of CurbCut, a new spinoff, who's done a tremendous job in developing a dashboard for the national survey. Thank you.